World Football in Qatar is the podcast taking you behind the scenes with all 32 teams at the World Cup. We're meeting players, the fans and people here for the tournament, telling the truly global story of the competition. That's World Football in Qatar from the BBC World Service. Find it wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
There were two Nicolas. There was the good Nicola that I was used to, that one. And then there was this evil Nicola that seemed to take over the good Nicola. The good Nicola was getting less and less, and the evil monster in me was taking over. And it felt like I had this Jekyll and Hyde personality. And the scary thing is, I never knew when this monster would come out.
It's Emily Webb here, and this is Lives Less Ordinary, the podcast from the BBC World Service that gives you an insight into the most intimate and defining moments of a person's life. I spoke to Nikki Owen in 2021, and our conversation has really stayed with me, as it's quite unlike any interview I've ever done. There were moments when Nikki was talking, and it was hard for me to reconcile the shocking story she was telling me with the woman sitting in front of me. We're going to be talking about suicide, self-harm, and how Nikki ended up in prison accused of trying to kill her mother. But also what happened afterwards, and how she's been able to turn herself into the successful businesswoman she is today. Nikki started work young. She was just a child when she got her first job as a model. This was the 1960s, and she lived with her family in the English county of Kent.
When I turned 12, 13, I started to do a little bit of modelling for pocket money, from modelling fitness machines to rugs. They were very strange. Yeah, I remember that I used to just go down into this local photographer's studio, and I'd just have to sit there and smile with these different gadgets and things. This was a long time ago, remember? It was the 1970s. And I remember having to wear some quite strange clothes at the time, not at all like the sort of clothes I'd wear then. And I was also doing very well as a dancer, and I used to practice every morning for a couple of hours before I used to go to school. And I was successful actually at dancing. I won over 40 cups and hundreds of medals.
What sort of dancing would you be doing?
All sorts of dancing, from ballet to contemporary to tap. And then, even though I can't sing at all, I used to love song and dance.
And that happy, shiny image of you on stage, did that match how you were feeling on the inside? Were you quite a happy child?
I was always quite quiet, and I would say, though, just very peaceful and calm. And life was very good. We had quite a boisterous family, and there were always people in the house. My mum and dad were very sociable people.
What was your relationship like with your parents?
I completely hero worship my dad. And my mum, it got a little bit fractious when I started getting into a teenager. And I think because Mum had always seen me as very quiet and well behaved, and I was kind of the good one, whereas my sister was always the naughty one. And my mum was a little bit shocked when suddenly I wanted to have a point of view, or I wanted to do something that perhaps she wasn't expecting. So we started to have a little bit of arguing. But my mum was amazing because she made all of these beautiful costumes for me to compete in, and they were absolutely beautiful. So she would be very pedantic about the quality. It was, for her, it was a hobby as well. And then the whole family would come and watch me compete in these different categories and be incredibly supportive.
Looking back, what was your most random costume, would you say?
The one that freaked me out a bit, because I actually did feel quite horrible when I was wearing it, was when I was the witch from Hansel and Gretel. And it was actually one of the dances I did when I started my periods. And I actually could feel this absolute kind of evilness in me. And I remember my dad saying once that he felt quite cold when he watched me perform, because it was as if his little girl had disappeared and I'd been possessed by this evil monster.
Because Hansel and Gretel is this children's book, and it's a very scary, I really remember it from when I was young. She's an incredibly scary character in that story.
Yes, in the dance I did, she pushed Hansel and Gretel into the oven to kill them. And I remember I felt that my whole body sort of became contorted into this old crone. And it felt that I was her, or she had somehow taken over the energy of me to do this dance. And I remember right at the end, I wasn't supposed to make any sound when I'm dancing. And I remember, as I was the one being pushed in the oven by the imaginary Hansel and Gretel, I remember screaming and feeling, wow, where did that come from? So that was a dance I remember a lot.
Interesting that you remember that as well, because of the way that you felt when you danced it. Looking back now, were there any other early examples where you look back and you see how your behaviour was changing in those years?
I remember I started feeling really depressed and very insular, and that I wanted to be on my own, and I'd cry a lot in my bedroom, and I felt uncomfortable with my body. So I remember looking in the mirror, and my body, it didn't feel like my body anymore. It felt like this woman's body. And I looked such an old 13-year-old that it just didn't feel like me. And I remember being really lost at that age.
One thing that you also started to do is you started to change the way you looked quite intentionally. What sort of things would you do?
I started to binge and overeat, and I started to steal the alcohol from my mum and dad's drink cabinet. And I dyed my hair with Ajax. So I ruined
Ajax
my hair.
is a bleach.
Ajax was like a cleaning fluid at the time that you just wouldn't use to dye your hair because it was bleached. So my hair went from this lovely warm brown to this horrible kind of yellowy orange. And I remember there was one time when my parents had gone out and I walked to the police station in my nightie and dressing gown because I'd just taken a load of tablets that I found in the medicine cabinet, and I didn't even know what they were. But it doesn't sound rational now, but at the time I thought, I don't want to worry mum and dad with this. I think I don't know if I really do want to die, so I'll go to the police station. And that was about 4 miles away, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and they took me to hospital where I had my first stomach pump.
Mm-hmm. And after that, how regular were the attempts to hurt yourself, would you say?
I remember counting up once. I think I had about 26 stomach pumps.
26.
And I started self-harming. I started to really want to destroy how I looked. So I remember cutting off all my hair. It was nearly waist length, and I chopped it all off and then I shaved it. So I was bald, and then I shaved my eyebrows and I cut off my eyelashes. I mean, it's really strange now because I'm imagining if my daughter did that to me, how I would feel. But it was kind of, I just had this hatred for myself. And I couldn't explain why, because my mum and dad were they were crying, and they just said, why, Nicola, why have you done this?
Would you notice that it would come in stages? Would you notice that you would feel bad sometimes and better at other times, do you think?
So how I related to it was that there were 2 Nicolas. There was the good Nicola that I was used to, that one. And then there was this evil Nicola that seemed to take over the good Nicola. The good Nicola was getting less and less, and the evil monster in me was taking over. And it felt like I had this Jekyll and Hyde personality. And the scary thing is, I never knew when this monster would come out. It would come out at horrible times. So my sister had just been through a really painful breakup with her first ever boyfriend. And it was in the days when we had records. I was just smashing plates of the piece of music she loved, and I was smashing plates and laughing. And the thought of doing all that was just horrible.
Tell me about this incident where you ended up chasing your mother around the kitchen. What happened there?
It was just so... She was just on at me, saying, "Why are you doing these things, Nicola? Why are you hurting yourself so much? Why? And she kept going on and on and on. And I just picked up this knife. And even now I can remember the fear on her face. And I just started chasing her around the kitchen, trying to stab her. That was horrible.
After that happened, after you did that, you say that you had this Jekyll and Hyde. Did the guilt kick in afterwards? Did you feel guilty the next day?
Everything got very muddled because I would do these terrible things and then I wouldn't understand why I did it. So I really thought something was quite badly wrong with me. And that's why I became more and more depressed and I felt more and more worthless. And I think that then, whereas the suicide attempts before had been cries for help, I wanted somebody to tell me why I was acting in this way. And I think then I did start to become seriously suicidal, and it was affecting my schoolwork, and all my friends, they started detaching a bit from me because I seemed just nutty, a bit mad.
Would you have good days? Would you have days where you would feel like your old self?
Yes, there would be days when I would feel normal, and then the guilt and then the anxiety over what I'd done to my family started to kick in, and I started getting a lot of panic attacks, and I'd be up all night struggling to breathe. That was always something I knew, that the anxiety and the stress of not knowing why. And I think that there was such a terrible atmosphere in the house. Everyone was walking on eggshells because no one really knew what I was capable of, because I could just go crazy within a minute. That's how quick I could change.
When was the first time that you tried to burn down the family home? What happened?
So because I was eating so much of the food, I'd put on 5 stone in weight, so I wasn't modelling anymore, I wasn't dancing anymore, there was no way. And my mum and dad took away my key because I wouldn't go up to London with them. They were taking my sister up to her music lesson, and my brother was going to Skateboard City, and they didn't want to leave me in the house to eat all the food. And my sister felt sorry for me because she didn't know what I'd be doing all day. So she gave me her key.
So where would you be staying when you weren't in the house?
Well, I'd have to walk around because Mum and Dad didn't want me in the house.
So it was during the day when they go during the day?
It was during the day, yeah. And then I let myself back into the house and I ate a mixing bowl full of Rice Krispies. So that's a whole packet of Rice Krispies. I think it was 2 pints of milk. And then I drank gin and whiskey from the drinks cabinet. And then I went upstairs to my bedroom. And I'd got all these photographs of me winning cups and medals and some of the nicer modelling shots around the mirror. I had a ballet bar in my room with a mirror, so it was full length. I didn't look like me anymore. And I had this compulsion to just... I remember just taking off all my clothes and feeling repulsion. And my eyes were just so cold. They were just black. There was just no emotion in them at all. I just looked like a monster. And I just didn't want to go on anymore because I just didn't want to live that life. And I could feel that was going to be my life. And I didn't want that life. I found some matches and I just set fire to the curtains in my bedroom, and I lay on my bed and I just watched the curtains go up in flames, and that's how it started. And it went really quickly. I mean, all the glass, it just exploded, and it was really hot, and I couldn't move. I was just completely frozen, and I just thought, this is it. This is really happening. This is it. And then we had this little puppy, a border collie called Emma, and she started crying at my bedroom door. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, she's going to die. She's going to die in the fire. I didn't think of Emma. And then I thought of my brother's tropical fish. I thought, oh no, I'm killing these animals. And then I just quickly grabbed a dressing gown, grabbed Emma, and just ran downstairs. And I can't remember much, but I think I sat downstairs. I was shaking, and I could hear fire engines, and everywhere was black. Everywhere, you couldn't see anything. And I couldn't breathe very much. And there were lots of noises of, I think the roof collapsed. And yeah, just that was the first time.
Mm. And what happened after that, after you set fire to the house?
I was arrested. I was taken to the police station. And they kept asking me why, and none of it made sense. Even now, I'm really remembering it as how I felt, not as the woman I am, because it just didn't make sense. And I felt so evil, so bad, like a real rotten apple, really rotten and horrible. And I just burnt my parents' house down. And I didn't know what to do, and I was still alive. I couldn't believe it. And it was just really horrible. And I was charged with arson. And I was sent to Holloway prison. And I remember Holloway just being shocking, absolutely shocking. The relentless noise, the strange prisoners, the way they woke you up in the morning, the regimented life. I just felt in shock. I couldn't believe it, really.
How long were you in Holloway for, Holloway prison?
The first time, I think I was only there on remand for 2 weeks or a month. I can't remember. And then I was released on bail as long as I saw a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist decided to put me on injections of sedatives to make me really docile. And it was so strong, the medication, that I couldn't think. And my arms were all stuck, and then my face would stick, so I'd have to be taken to hospital to have an injection to relax my face because it would stick. And I felt nutty, and I was sent to Bexley Mental Home while they rebuilt the house.
When you did get home after that, what sort of place were you in mentally?
A terrible place. And Mum and Dad wanted me to try and have some sort of normal life. And they said, well, you don't want to dance anymore. You don't want to go back to college. Then you need to get a job. And that was terrifying, because I just didn't want to look at people. I didn't want people to look at me. And then I did the same thing again. They just rebuilt the house. And my mum was in the house, in the kitchen. And I set fire to the house again. And I ran away to the wood.
What happened to your mum? What happened to the burning house?
My mum managed to put the fire out by herself. She was terrified because she thought, what if my brother and sister had been in the house? And it had been at night. So she reported me to the police, and she said that was the hardest thing she'd ever done. And that was when there was no more bail, and I was charged with arson, endangering life, and intent to kill my mother.
And when you were charged with that intent, the place that you were in when you did that, do you think that that was your intention?
I don't know. It just felt as if I wasn't me anymore. That's the thing. I cannot explain. There's no logic to this. And that's what it's very hard to live with, because, you know, I looked like a monster. I acted like a monster. As far as I was concerned, I was a monster.
And how old were you when that happened?
I was 17, 18.
And when you were in your cell and you were facing this charge, did it hit you when you were there? Did it hit you?
No. It was just heavy sedation. I just felt like a zombie. And I got more violent. Even in custody, I was violent. So when I was taken to Holloway Prison, I was so violent that they put me into solitary confinement. They put me in a dress that was made out of indestructible material, so I couldn't hang myself. And there was a mattress in the room, not a bed, because they thought I could do something in a bed. There was a mattress, and there was a potty, and there was a blanket, and they kept the cell in darkness. And I was fed through a hatch in the door. My dad wanted to come and see me, and the wardress on the block, she let my dad look through the slit in the door. And that was the worst moment of my life, because I could tell my dad was trying to be so brave. And he was saying, "Come on, Nick, we're going to find out what's wrong with you. Come on, my girl, I'm not going to let you down." And I could see he was trying so hard to be brave. And the pain in his eyes, it was just indescribable. And I just wanted a hug. That's all I wanted. I wanted Dad to make it all right. And I just wanted him to tell me why. I just didn't know why. But my dad, he was then told that I was so violent that they had to make an application to Broadmoor, which was the hospital for the criminally insane. And even in prison, everybody dreaded Broadmoor, because you just knew you wouldn't get out of Broadmoor.
And this was when you were in prison, and they brought a range of psychiatrists to come and see you.
My dad,
to work out what was happening.
In desperation, he couldn't understand why I had been so normal and why I could just go so mad. So Dad decided to call in. He wanted 8 different opinions, because the opinions were all so bad. So he wanted 8 to make sure he covered off all the bases. And I was described as a maniacal psychopath, incurably insane, and a danger to society, with a recommendation I go to Broadmoor.
When you say those diagnoses out loud now, and I'm sitting opposite you and I'm looking at you, and obviously you're a very different person now. What do you make of it?
I'm trying to remember back to the feeling then. It was numb. It was horror that I just completely ruined my life, my family's life, my mum and dad's life. And I knew nothing would ever be the same. And I couldn't imagine what a life behind bars would be like. And I was talking to the wardresses who were trying to cheer me up. And they said, "Well, it's really nice in Broadmoor." It's funny now when I look back, and they were just trying to ease it. But my dad, when he read these reports, he said there was no way I was just going to accept that. He said I had to go and meet with this top psychiatrist and really get to the bottom of it, because it didn't make sense to him that madness would just come out of where? The air? Why? And he went to see one of the psychiatrists and asked him that, and the psychiatrist said that my mum and dad should focus their lives on my brother and sister and forget about me, because I'd never be free. and that he suspected it was something to do with the endocrine system.
Which is a gland?
My dad didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was. But my dad, it was the days before the internet and everything. He came home and he went straight to the library and he started researching endocrine system that linked him to hormones. And he was thrown out of the library because they said, we've got to close now. And he said, no, don't close. No, this is a matter of life and death. And then that night he took our dog for a walk in the wood and he bumped into his old PA. And she said, how's that lovely daughter Nicola of yours? And he told her the story. And she said, oh, that's really strange. I've just read an article in Woman's Own saying, are your periods driving you mad?
Are your periods driving you mad?
Yes.
And was that the moment that your dad thought there might be something in that?
He didn't at the time, but he thought it sounded interesting. And that night, she put a copy of the article through the front door. And my dad said, as he was reading this article, he went cold because he knew that it was describing what was going on with me.
Mm-hmm. Another very important thing here is that your mother kept diaries at the time. So she kept a daily diary. And in those diaries, obviously, there were records of your behaviour and how it shifted. How soon was it that they started to notice there was a pattern in your behaviour?
Well, as soon as they realised that it could be something to do with my periods, my dad found this specialist, Dr. Katrina Dalton, that was a specialist in premenstrual syndrome, and he gatecrashed her surgery in Harley Street and begged her to come and examine me in Holloway Prison, which she did. My mum then had all of the dates that then showed this cyclical nature, this every month something happened at the same time every month for the same amount of days, and it would completely disappear on the first day of my period. My mum had kept all of these diaries, and then my dad asked her what was the treatment. She said she needs to come off all the medication and go on to progesterone therapy.
Premenstrual syndrome, or PMS, can affect women in the run-up to their periods. There's never been a definitive answer on what exactly causes it, but it can have a severe behavioural and psychological impact.
The symptoms for me was, weight gain, really very strong emotions, self-loathing. And so in prison, I came off all these antidepressants and sedatives, stopped having all the injections, and I was given this progesterone therapy. And within about 3 weeks, I felt incredibly different.
Really?
I felt like normal. And it was so shocking. And the transformation of me shocked kind of everybody in prison as well. And I was let out of the solitary confinement, and my dad decided to call back all those psychiatrists that had written me off, and they couldn't believe the change in me.
When you found out that you had this imbalance, when you started to feel more normal, how did that change the way you felt about yourself?
Well, it suddenly made sense. There were so many things that I could relate to in my behaviour that I suddenly realised were caused by severe premenstrual syndrome.
Mm-hmm. So there was this idea that this would be part of your defence in court, because you were going to be going to court and you were facing these charges of attempting to kill your mother. This is the 1970s, and it feels quite radical to present this as a case in court. You had a male barrister, you had a male judge. How did it go? How did presenting that evidence go?
So I remember we didn't know when the case was going to come to trial, and my dad had already tried to get a delay from the judge to say, we need more time to prove that the evidence, her behaviour, we need more time. And the judge at the time said, no, let the judge of the day decide whether to give more time or not. Let the girl come to trial. So it felt like a race against time. And my case was finally heard at the Old Bailey on the 22nd of December 1978 in court number 13, and I was kept in the cells at the Old Bailey underneath, and my barrister came to see me, and he said I needed to prepare myself for the fact that the judge would not accept the plea. He said it's a legal precedent we're creating, and we really don't know how it's going to go, so you have to prepare yourself for a 10 to 15 year sentence. And at the age I was 18, feeling really normal again, I couldn't comprehend that. And I was taken up into the courtroom, and the prosecution was actually delayed in the Blackwall Tunnel because there was lots of traffic at the time, which meant that the judge had lots of time to read all the reports while he was waiting. And so as he was reading all these reports, I didn't know what he was thinking. I was then told to go back down to the cells to give him time, and then I was brought up again. But I had a feeling it might go in my favour, because when I was brought up for the second time, he said I didn't need to sit in the dock. And the judge himself quoted, "This is a miracle. This is clearly what's wrong with Nicola." And in the excitement of everything, he actually forgot to sentence me because everyone was going crazy, and I was trying to get to Mum and Dad, and we were almost out the door because there were press everywhere. And my mum and dad didn't want me to speak to the press or anything. They didn't want the press to see me as I was. They were very protective. So we were almost being smuggled out the back door when we were called back in. And I thought, oh, he's changed his mind. I've got to go back. But he'd forgotten to sentence me. And I was given a 2-year suspended sentence on the grounds that I continue with the progesterone therapy. And it made legal history, that case. It was the first time that PMS had been used to argue a major crime, and I walked free.
When you walked free and when you got home, and obviously there was that initial elation that you were free and you weren't going to be going to prison, when you were actually at home surrounded by your family and I suppose facing the consequences of those years before, how hard was it to rebuild as a family?
Really hard, because I was home, so there was relief that I was home. But my mum and dad were paranoid. I was full of remorse. So I suddenly was experiencing everything. Every room in the house was evidence of some terrible thing I'd done in that room. You know, I couldn't walk anywhere. If I walked out into the street, people would cross the road rather than talk to me or say hello, because everybody had heard about this mad woman that had set fire to her family home. So it was a very difficult time, and I was getting lots of stress, lots of anxiety. I was having panic attacks. And then I remember one day thinking that I've either got to sort myself out and only I can do it, or it's game over for me. And I realised that ultimately, I don't know how I came to that decision, but I realised that my most important responsibility at that moment was to sort myself out.
When you had those people crossing the street rather than interacting with you, do you think that there were people at the time who didn't see it as a legitimate defence, do you think?
I remember being interviewed by people saying, well, it's a bit convenient, isn't it? And it's not a very kind of attractive illness, because you've got this monster type girl who doesn't look great, is acting horribly. It's not someone you naturally feel very sympathetic to. And I think that's part of the issue, because you're so horrible during those moments just before your period that, you know, people remember that. And it's hard for them to think, oh, this is just a hormone imbalance. This is PMS. And there was a lot of scepticism because it just wasn't talked about then. Nobody talked about your periods. It was something that you had a kind of a little bit of a talk in the gym class in PE very quickly. And then that was it. Nothing else was spoken. So I think in 1978, people were still kind of very sceptical. It's not like now where people realise the impact that your hormones can have over your mood. Everything is connected.
And as you started to look at your future and as you started to decide what you were going to do, how much did your experience shape what you then decided to do?
I remember when I wrote to Dad from prison and I said, if there's a God, Dad, why am I going through this? And the letter he wrote back, the words will always stay etched in my heart forever, because his words were the reason why I'm doing the work I'm doing now. He said, one day, Nicola, you'll look back on this time and you'll realise that everything you're going through is defining the legacy of the woman you are destined to become. And it makes me go cold now, because my dad saved my life and he died in 2018, and I was so blessed to be there. And we were just talking about everything, Dad and I. And I said to him, Dad, you've had such an amazing life. What are you most proud of? And he said, saving you. He said, because you've helped thousands and thousands of people. And he always said, I want to come and see you speak. I want to come and see you working. And he came to see me once at the Institute of Directors. I was doing a big talk there. And he was just so proud of me at the end. And it was really lovely, because I was always able then to give back to my parents. And one of the things I realised is that if I hadn't have gone through that, and I really believe this, that I'd have probably had quite a normalish life, quite an unremarkable life. I wouldn't have been driven to really help so many people. But now it feels like this is why I went through that.
Tell me about the sort of work that you do and the way in which you use it to reach as many people as possible.
I am an expert in helping people to create change by helping them to release some of their emotional baggage that they've been holding on to for often years and years and years. So I've always wanted to find ways to sort out myself quickly. It took me 10 years to get myself back into a place where I felt I can now live my life on my terms, but it was hard work to get there. And I thought, if I've been able to sort myself out with some of the techniques that I've evolved from different places, why don't I use those techniques to help others? And I have honestly worked with over 3,000 people now, one-to-one. And then when the pandemic happened, then nobody could come and see me. I wasn't doing anything, but everyone was phoning me up with having terrible anxiety attacks. So I thought, okay, I've just got to change how I do this. So I created an app called the Healing Hub, which is based on all the tools and techniques that I've used on myself, using ways to rewire your mindset, because I was so conditioned to believe I was evil that I needed to start to reshape the neural circuits in my brain so that I started to love and accept myself rather than hate and judge myself, because that was really important. So I like to think that I've created something good from something that could have been so terribly bad.
What about your relationship with your mum? Because obviously you were facing these charges of attempting to kill her. How was your relationship when you were in Holloway prison? And how did you manage to work on that afterwards as well?
So my relationship with my mum was quite strained when I was in prison. And now I can honestly say that I feel such love and compassion for her. She's now 86, so I'm her main carer. Yeah, she's really proud of me. We've really worked through that. She has completely forgiven me for that. We've talked about it loads. It's just a very normal mother-daughter relationship now. She still talks about it. And she says to me things like, can you believe that this happened to you? She says to me, oh, you don't look your age. You're very glamorous. You're not at all as I thought you'd be when you were in prison. I thought you would never, ever come out. It's lovely.
Thank you to Nikki Owen for sharing her story. That interview was first broadcast on the BBC World Service in 2021. 40 years on, and there's been more research into premenstrual syndrome and how to treat it. More recent studies have questioned the effectiveness of progesterone, so if you think you have PMS, the advice is to contact your doctor. And if you're dealing with suicidal thoughts, there's support available online. You can try bbc.co.uk/actionline or befrienders.org. Thank you for downloading this episode of Lives Less Ordinary. I'm Emily Webb. The producer was Tom Harding-Assender, and Manazza Khan is our editor. Next time, Mabeen will be talking to Momin Sweitard. He's a Palestinian filmmaker and DJ who unearthed thousands of lost tapes in an abandoned building. At first, it was magical, but soon going through the archive became an overwhelming process. Just as he was about to give up, a bright yellow cassette tape caught his eye. The sound was unlike anything he'd heard before, and it would lead him to a world of underground protest music. He became obsessed with the cassette, but could he track down who had made it? The story of the Palestinian tapes is our next episode.
My Indian Life is back for Season 3, the podcast about life in 21st century India. I'm the host, Kalki Kekala, and each week I explore what it means to be young and Indian.
In their own way, people express this feeling of change.
I am meeting more extraordinary people from every corner of India.
We are the ones who are most vulnerable when it comes to impacts of climate crisis because we do not have access to resources to protect ourselves.
As they share their lives and amazing stories with me.
But you don't see people on wheelchair or, have some kind of disability. And when you see this large amount of people all together, you feel like, okay, this is where I belong.
That's Kalki Presents My Indian Life from the BBC World Service. Just search for My Indian Life wherever you found this podcast.